Recording in progress. Hello again. It's actually me again. On this blustery March day. No, it's not. It's June the 4th, 5th, June the 5th. But it feels like March here in the north of England, where we have huge winds, massive big clouds just scudding across the sky. And when the sun comes out, it's okay. But when it's not out, it's 10 degrees. So, is this an operation? Because, global warming, and to prove that there is no global warming, only weather manipulation. I think everybody's waking up to this. But anyway, that is not the reason that I'm here doing this right now. I am, in fact, here to tell my story. And if you're not interested, it's fine. You can skip to the next video on your list or whatever. But I do feel, as much as I am resistant to doing this, because I honestly find it all a bit boring now, but I do know that there are going to be certain people who will say, who does she think she is? And there are going to be people who are going to wonder how we knew. How did some people know straight away that we were in some kind of very strange situation in March 2020? And I believe that for those of us who already experienced trauma at the hands of the dark players, we just had this kind of inbuilt knowledge, knowing from the experiences that we'd all had in our varied different ways in the past. And so we were kind of alerted to a feeling that something's not quite right. Okay. Anyway, we're not going to go down the path of told you so and nobody listened and all that, because, it had to be that way. We had to have everybody at different levels. There'd be no point if everybody was just at the same level. It would just, it wouldn't make sense. Everybody's at a different point with their own perception, and we're all adding our little bits to the story of what happened in March 2020. But before I get on to that video, which is going to be called The Great Awakening from my perspective, first of all, as I said, I'd like to share a bit about me and who I am. And to start, I'm actually going to read a chapter from my book. Now, don't go off and buy this on Amazon or whatever. If anybody wants a copy, I'd prefer it if you just email me and I can send it to you. From a Place of Freedom, I wrote it in 2010 and published it in 23. It took that long to get it all. I think I wrote it in 6 months, and my soul wrote it. I was extremely depressed at the time. I was in Malaysia and I was really struggling. And I met somebody whose mother, an Australian expat, who her kids were at the same school. And her mother was visiting and from Australia. Her name's Diana Healy. And I went along, and she was a healer, psychic, intuitive, whatever. And so I went along and had a session with her, and she said to me, your father is here and he's asking for forgiveness. And I replied, oh, well, I don't know what for. And even though I knew subconsciously. And so she said, why don't you write a letter to your father? And that letter turned into this. So I would like to begin by reading chapter 3. It's only 2 and a bit pages. It's pretty large text font, which a lot of the older people like. So yeah, I just want to read this because I do come back to it quite often, and I'm a bit kind of surprised about what I wrote. And who am I to kind of judge? But anyway, it also, to me, it sort of connects with now and what's happening now. So yeah, chapter 3. She was the angel Gabriel, standing silent and still, her pale grey-blue eyes wide with wonder. She breathed, I am. She was the beginning and the end and everything in between, all in that golden, holy moment. As the teachers bustled about, adjusting her white costume and pinning the big golden wings to her back, Carrie gazed through the chemically sprayed windows, as the chemically snow-sprayed windows at the darkening royal blue sky outside. There, twinkling as bright as a very small sun, was a lone star. She sucked in her breath and stared. It seemed to be a magic star, and its heavenly light mesmerized her. And as the earth beneath her feet shivered and shifted ever so slightly, she felt a part of herself being pulled slowly, slowly outwards, a part that was a fine silvery thread coming from between and behind her eyes, and which she was attached to and part of the rest, and which was attached to and part of the rest of the universe. Delicate and spangly, she floated weightless and speechless, just slightly above herself, and watched as the teachers guided her out towards the stage, the golden wings bobbing and swaying as she shuffled her bare feet forward. She could not feel herself moving, but she could see everything. Her short, straight, pale blonde hair shone white in the spotlight, creating a halo around her. A reverent hush descended upon the disheveled, raggedy audience of parents and grandparents, relatives and friends who were gathered for the Christmas primary school production. The school had been transformed, and Kerry was in Nazareth, in Galilee. Or was it Bethlehem? She was not sure, but she was on a warm hillside, and it was night time. She looked up, and her mouth fell softly open as she beheld the thousands of brilliant stars that stretched forever throughout space, boundless and free. She inhaled the warm, dusty air deeply and closed her eyes in a smile of pure delight. A voice boomed out of a microphone somewhere, but to Kerry, it was the voice of an angel speaking on her behalf. She looked down upon herself and marveled at all the golden, glittery beauty of her costume. Yes, she was the angel Gabriel. She felt sacred. And she had a message that she must deliver. The school hall was a town, and miracles and magic had come to visit that evening. Kerry was enraptured. God, or what she imagined God to be, a kind old wizard perhaps, was everywhere. The hush that had fallen upon the audience as she had walked out from behind the dusty scarlet curtains told her that everyone else could feel the magic too. As she stood there in the silvery holy lights, she felt that she might cry with the joy of it all. As she walked home late that evening, the magic was still with her. It was an icy dark blue night, but their way was lit by streetlight and starlight. The air was alive and shimmering all around her, and she felt engulfed by an enormous sense of peace, well-being, and knowing, even though she was only small. She peered up through the clean, cold atmosphere as she clutched her mother's hand and smiled up at the frosty sky. The smiley-shaped crescent moon, pale gold and glowing above the earth, beamed back. Now, I'd also like to read the next chapter, which is just this page here, just to show what it was really like. And, as I talk about my life story, I would like to make it absolutely clear that I adore my mother. I have so much love for her. To me, she is like a wounded child. She was broken. Her story is unbelievable. And I would like to write it one day. It features her birth is the prologue of my book, and that chapter is called The Curse, because, how did I know? We were all here breaking generational curses. But this is what my book has taught me, my soul. I channeled my soul higher self to write this. I would often go into a completely different space. And when I came out of a writing session, I often felt like it took a few minutes for me to reorient where I was, because I was time traveling back to the events, and your subconscious doesn't know the difference of things being remembered or imagined or actually happening in the here now, which is all very kind of messed up and confused. And yeah, we have a lot to learn. But anyway, let me just read this next little chapter. And again, anything that I've written where my mother might appear to be sort of demonic, it's not her. It was what was done to her. And I now realize that we were being targeted with all sorts of things. And yeah, she was really struggling. And I'm so grateful that she stayed alive and she stayed around, because my sister and I would have ended up in care. And we all know what happens there. So I'm just going to read this, and I'm going to start just rambling as quickly as I can about my life, because I don't want to go on too long. So this is chapter 4, and here it is. They are choking back the swelling, gloppy cereal, one child each side of the fireplace, trying to glean some warmth from its miserly glow. It is shivery cold, and the air harsh, like their mother's words, and the tears are flowing down their faces, which are red and swollen. And it is like this every morning. Sometimes the cereal is with hot water, as there is no money for milk. And their mother's fury and frustration is bubbling around them, and they are drowning in it, and can only curl into themselves and hope the tirade will end soon. They cannot even look at each other for fear of provoking their mother further. She is mad as hell, and there is nothing that they could do that would be right. She snatches at them, hisses, and pulls them out the front door and drags them up the road to school, all the time muttering and full of fury. The children's mouths are pursed against the howls that are trying to escape, but they know better than to cry now. So they trudge along and drag their aching hearts behind them like lead balloons. So this book is book 1. The childhood years. So I was born October the 6th, 1970. And I was born in a place called Glen Royd Hospital in Blackpool, which was run by the nuns. And my mother received awful treatment there for 1 week. They kept her in for a week and kept taking me away. It's kind of interesting that the exact same thing happened to me when I gave birth to my first child. And I was my mother's first child, one of 2. I have an 18 months younger sister, Annette. And yeah, and when I had my first child, things didn't go well because they interfered. That's a whole other story for a whole other video. And it's just interesting. They kept me in for a few days and kept taking my daughter away from me. So, my mother claims that, or she shares that, the birth was 2 days, extremely painful, and she wanted to die the whole way through. And the nun nurses were extremely cruel to her and only allowed her to see me for a couple of hours a day. And I can't even imagine how awful. Well, I do kind of know because it happened to me with my first daughter, and they had taken her away for 3 hours and brought her back, and things were not right at all. I had expressly said that I wanted to breastfeed, and yet they brought her to me. A big fat Malay nurse came waddling along with my baby all swaddled and a bottle of formula in her mouth. And I lost my shit. And so they kind of sectioned me and said that I wasn't well enough to go home with my baby. And I think they did similar to my mother. And this is how they drive a wedge in the kind of birth process, and they drive a wedge between the mother and the child. It's like an extra separation, and then you've got like the cutting of the cord with the steel scissors, which sends all of the subtle energies into shock. And it's all by design, and it's not an accident. Every single aspect of our reality that gets us down is by design. So my mother was not married, and which is why the nuns were giving her terrible treatment. The Catholic nuns now, they don't like this unmarried mother business, and they think it's their place now to teach you a bloody well lesson about you being a little floozy whore and all that now. And my poor mother was anything but, because my father was the only guy that she'd ever really had a relationship with. But the thing about my father, Mr. David Stewart Harrison, born in Hale Barnes, grew up around the area that I'm in now, Darwin, Accrington, Clitheroe, that kind of area. I met somebody actually a few weeks ago who knew of my father. He didn't know if he was alive or dead. He's probably about 89. But he knew of his wife, who runs Accrington Market, and crazy, crazy. And so, yeah, my father wasn't around. He seemed to only appear when he was feeling a bit randy, or I don't know. I mean, I really don't know, because I don't remember him really being around much. He used to kind of come and visit my mother, as I say, I think because he wanted to just have sex quite often. My sister and I would be kind of locked out of the house, sitting on the front step, waiting for him to finish whatever he was doing. And this was all happening in a village called Rishton. And we lived on a road called Bon Meadow Crescent, which was a kind of a circular road. So you'd enter, and then it was a circle, and then you'd leave. So there was nobody ever went there unless you were going there, if you know what I mean. It was a pretty basic, small house that he had rented for us. But I just remember there being so much angst and so much suffering and fear and frustration on the part of my mother, because my father was the one who brought money for food, and apparently my mother was caught shoplifting a chicken and some vegetables to feed us. But the guy who was the manager of the little co-op in the village, he kind of knew what was going on, so he didn't call the police. He just said, just don't let it happen again. By the way, I'm so cold. It is really freezing. My hands are frozen. I'm frozen. And it's June in England. Sorry, I can't help but digress. But I know the story I'm telling, so I can get back to it. And I don't really want to say too much about the childhood years, because it's all in here. I'd like to just start with, I'd like to go into kind of what happened in my, from puberty onwards, because I think that's when behavioral issues and elements of what I can only really describe as kind of psychosis and my struggles started to rear their ugly heads as my subconscious was screaming to be heard, because some really horrifically dark things had happened to me, I suspect at the hands of my father and his friends. I've no idea if my mother was aware or not. I think she must have been. And you know what happens in these things when a woman is hanging on the every word of a man. and dependent on that man for her absolute existence and the existence of and survival of her children, you're going to turn a blind eye. You have to. It becomes levels of survival, and dealing with possible incest and inappropriate sexual any well, conduct and whatever isn't something that people can easily accept or deal with. Not many mothers are able to kind of, become the righteous kind of warrior lion mother of the cub and protect their children, because quite often if this is happening, the mother is a victim as well, and it all just becomes extremely complicated. The thing is, I just remember from, very, very early being aware of this. Like, I was aware that my mother was struggling. I was aware that her rages and her moods and her crying and her depression and her mood swings and the kind of almost schizophrenic behavior. I just knew that there was something else beneath it. And I also knew I had to help her and support her and forgive and accept. And, she often would tell stories to us as we were growing up about her life. And she'd often say, we were the best children. And she'd say to me, that I was a gift from God and never cried and always had a smile. And that kept her going. And I was literally her reason for getting up each day. And yeah, I probably am going to get upset as I tell it this, as I go through this, because it just makes me so sad. It makes me so sad because this has happened to so many people. So many mothers and their and children have been interfered with. The relationship, the bond has been broken and attacked. I'm not alone in my experiences, and the reason I feel compelled to share it is because I hope to activate and remind other people who are struggling with weird behavioral issues in relationships or with self-worth, and feeling as if that they have these dreams or memories or experiences that they think that they're imagining and they're not. And I ended up moving to Malaysia, didn't I, for 22 years, and broke my mother's heart, and also went to university in Leeds, which was a good, gosh, how far away was it? About 80 to 100 miles away from Blackpool, where I was born and spent and grew up from age 7. It's a bit complicated. Before the age of 10, we moved 22 times because my father was always moving us to different places. He claimed it was because the rent was cheaper, but there were quite often other people living in the house, or yeah, it was just all very strange. And then when I was 10, we moved to a council estate in Blackpool called Grange Park. But this wasn't until we had spent a couple of years on a road coming out of Blackpool. And I believe that this road, the A6, which is kind of connected to where I live now, if I was to kind of exit where I live now, drive straight all the way down the A6, I would end up at this hostel. And then I would end up at the coast. And it's almost like everything's just divinely connected. And so we lived in this hostel for 2 years in one room. It's all in here. And that's where my sister was possessed by, I mean, obviously at the time telling the story, it was a demon. I now know, looking back, that it was some sort of technology that was being used to open up the interdimensional doorways. And this thing that entered my sister and took over, destroyed her. I mean, she's still alive, and we are attempting to reconnect properly, but she's very broken because her life also completely fucked up because of evil things done to her, and she's a victim of the SS social services, and she had 3 boys, 3 dads, And each of them, apart from the two younger ones were taken from her and given to their fathers. And, it's all just wrong. It's just wrong. And she's in a huge amount of pain. She's suffered so much, and it all happened when I was not here. I was in Malaysia, and I was dealing with my own shit there because, the story of my life doesn't end with, growing up and running away to university and having a happy life. I had drama at university, drama at when I became a teacher. And I'm going to share the story of how I lost my job thanks to Piers Morgan and the British tabloid bullshit media who performed what's called a humiliation ritual on myself. But that was the catalyst for me going off to Malaysia for 22 years. And in Malaysia, I was confronted with a whole load of black magic, psychic attacks. I mean, it was insane. And yeah. And then came March 2020. And as soon as that happened, everything in my life made sense, or kind of almost everything. There were still some things I couldn't remember, things about my early childhood, but I do remember certain things. I also remember at university reaching out to my father, tracked him down and found him, and he was furious when I said who I was because I kind of pretended to be someone else to get through to him. And the last time I had seen him, I was 10, and I was at university and I didn't have money. And I was kind of struggling. My mother was struggling. My sister was struggling. I mean, it was hell the whole time, but I'm going to get into that about the technology that they use, which I believe we were kind of experimented on in the council estates for this time, this massive MK Ultra operation that the whole planet is in now. They've been practicing this on all kinds of populations all around the world for a very long time. And so this is my witness statement of what happened to me. And I'm sure many of you will recognize my story in your own lives, and it will trigger memories and inner standings and realizations, because we have all been attacked. It's not just me. So the childhood, yeah, we lived in this hostel, and then we moved to Grange Park, and sounds lovely, doesn't it? We lived at number 212. Now, what was interesting about the particular house that we moved into was that there was a road that went all the way down the middle. And then on the side of this particular road, there was like two grass verges with houses that kind of went, sort of set back. And it was quite big. These verges were very big. There was a big path that went across one to the shop, a row of shops that I used to absolutely hate and dread going to, because all the council estate kids would be hanging around and kicking footballs. And, I mean, my sister and we were not supposed to be there. We just didn't really seem to fit in. And so it was always a bit traumatic whenever we had to go and get shopping for my mum from the little shops, right, for dinner and stuff, or collect her benefits or whatever. And we used to play on those grass verges, and so our house was in like a little setback, so our house was here, and then there was this triangle of grass. I would say there was 4 houses, and then there was two lots of blocks of flats that had probably about 12 flats. It was double story. It's all changed now, and they were mainly old people. But I remember, my sister and I used to play on the grass. We used to run around, do gymnastics and all sorts, and, fully unaware that they were all paedophiles and, lonely old men living in these flats who had the perfect view through their net curtains of my sister and I gallivanting around on this grass, this grass verge. And, lots of weird things happened. There used to be a guy that used to come there who, when I actually revisit that memory now, I believe was a hybrid. He definitely was not from, I don't think he was born on the surface. He used to rock up. He was like an albino, and he always used to wear black glasses. And I don't know, because of all the things that happened, I kind of realized now that I was always sensing the energy of people rather than the things that they said or did. I can sense the energy behind people's words. But unfortunately, because of the lack of self-worth, which comes with the trauma-based mind control, which I'll get into in a minute, it makes you doubt yourself. You doubt everything. You can't take your instincts seriously. It's very strange. It's a really weird space to be in, because it's like it's like your third eye's open and is seeing and experiencing things on a different level, but your conscious mind is just shutting it down. And this is how the MK Ultra works. It's like the cognitive dissonance, because the things that have happened are so awful and so terrible that when you kind of try to remember them, it's almost like that can't be real. It just can't be real. And yet we've seen it all in all the movies and the TV shows, and it's all in there. They've shown us everything. And so I now have no choice but to honor and respect my memories. And I have total forgiveness and inner standing for the perpetrators, because I know they knew not what they did. And I also know that I chose to experience this so that I would be able to hold the frequency at this time, in this great awakening process that we're in, to assist others who've experienced similar to be able to let go. Because part of the reason that they've done this is to actually trap us in our minds, in our thoughts, constantly at odds with ourselves, because we are afraid to accept our own truth. And if you can't do that, you're going to be stuck. All right. We're in this process now, which is about ascension, but the ascension is within. We're not ascending and starting flying off in the sky, although that might happen in your own imagination, right? In your own realm, and it's going to look different for everyone. But we're in this ascension process, and part of it is disclosure. Part of it is that we have to know where we are, what's been going on, and it's all been about the children, and we've all dropped the ball. We've all dropped the ball on everything. And so, I'm having a discussion at the moment with Harry Potter, Harry the whippersnapper, Harry Eastwood. And he believes there won't be like an EBS kind of shutdown, and that everything's just going to gradually, gently morph into what it should always have been. But personally, I'm kind of feeling like we kind of need a lockdown to sort of rid the world of the minions who don't seem to have got the memo or realize what's actually really going on. Or, is the solar flare just going to take them out? Are they just going to, rapture out or whatever to a different reality? I mean, we all know about this new Earth and the bifurcation of the planets. But anyway, that's coming on. I'm talking about the Great Awakening now instead of my story. But my story um is actually totally connected to the Great Awakening, because it's through my story and my memories that this past 4 years makes complete sense, and how I've been able to do the inner work, knowing full well that I had to forgive, and I had to kind of make peace with what had happened, and also accept that I chose, and it was all just experiences. And we have to share this with each other to make sure it never happens again. So school was a bit rubbish. I went to 4 different schools, primary schools. So I didn't ever really get to make friends that lasted. And I tell you, it's terrifying starting a new school over and over. Everybody's looking at you. And I was already clearly a bit weird, because I was very, very highly strung, very insecure. But at the same time, I was also really funny and entertaining. And it's almost like I kind of feel like I am still a little bit. It's kind of getting better, but I feel like I'm two people. And in fact, we know that we're more than two. But the two main characters who have been controlling my life are the first one, I think I just mentioned in my previous video today, is Tamashimi Narakima, who is a warrior of God here to, spread a message and assist in the healing of the planet and all the trauma and the darkness, and to kind of help people to come to a peaceful inner standing of why we're here and what it means and kind of how to get out. All right. So I'm a bit of a beacon. I'm not afraid to share my story. I fear nothing now because, as I said earlier, death is an illusion, as is everything. All right. My story is a metaphor. All stories are metaphors. They only exist in our imagination, in our memories, right? Because there's only the now time that's real. This moment that I'm talking to you, even a minute ago, it's gone. It's a past. It's a memory. It's always about the now. But the story is kind of a map to help guide others. All right. So yeah, I went to all these different schools and never really made proper friends. And the friends I did make tended to be bullies, like Maggie McGlynn, who has since passed on. God rest her soul. I suspect she was probably abused as well, because Blackpool, for anyone that doesn't know, I mean, God, it's in the name, isn't it? Blackpool. It's a Blackpool. Although I did hear Michael Sarian, whatever his name is, he said that the word blach, actually means white. Sorry, that sounded a bit weird. Blach, blach. It actually means white. So is it a white pool? And also on Blackpool, literally the Blackpool beach that is just mud that just goes out now. I wonder what's under there. Blackpool Tower is an air bus. You know those what are they called? The blimps, those big air balloon things that people used to travel. They dock at the top of the towers and people come down. It's amazing. But anyway, Blackpool, also very Blackpool's a very, it seems to be a very important place because it's where the Conservative Party used to hold their conferences. We know there's lots of tunnels. We know that certain aspects of Blackpool, like the courthouse, the police station, the opera house, Blackpool Tower, there's like 5 points that make up the satanic star. And so it's obviously another kind of check that I would have been born in this place, right? To anchor energy. And that I've now returned 54 years later, nearly, 20 miles away from the same place, at Beacon Fell, to hold space. So yeah, I ended up when I went to secondary school, I went to a school called St. Mary's, and it was on the edge of the council estate. And so everybody knew where I lived, and it was so embarrassing that we lived, off the government, and my mum was on benefits, and everybody kind of knew that my mum wasn't quite right, and that I don't know, and God knows what the parents were talking about. I had many, many interactions with friends' parents who were so rude. People thought if your mother was not married and that you were homeless, that they could just treat you like shit. And so, you know, being treated like shit in March 2020 onwards, when I refused to wear the mask and I was kind of like screaming at the top of my lungs, oh my God, what the fuck? This is ridiculous. And all of the awful treatment. It wasn't that new to me because I had been dealing with it my whole life. The attacks and the insane things that have happened. I mean, it literally, I think I'd need to write 100 books to get it all in. And so because when I went to high school, I didn't have any one particular friend that I was going with because, when I got there, it was like all these kids from all these different schools started being like, I know you went to my school. So I just became like this. It was kind of bizarre if you think about it. It was like it was even spreading my light around the different schools then that were going to all kind of, be meeting up at the school. Now, obviously, I mean, the first school was in Rishton, which was a bit further away, but there was 3 schools that I went to in Blackpool. Once we had moved to Blackpool when I was 7, after a visit to Ireland, where my mother, and that's in here, where my mother had gone to her birthplace and to her family because we were homeless. And my father had said, I'm not supporting you anymore because when you're 7, they can't program you anymore. So whatever my father was doing to me, I don't think it happened to my sister. My sister was, as I said, attacked by this demonic entity that came through the sink at the top of this old Victorian building with a big graveyard behind it. And, it was horrific. I can't even tell you those 2 years in that hostel. I'm sorry, I'm jumping back. It was just awful. She used to scream every night. But again, it's in here. Yeah, my father, he wanted us to disappear at age 7, and we lasted 6 weeks in Ireland. But unfortunately, my mother's family, her brothers and sisters who were there, they wanted none of it. They didn't care. And we returned back to Blackpool, totally homeless, lived in a train station for a bit, well, a day, but we were homeless. We were sitting in a train station. And then we were picked up by a guy who worked for the council who told us that we were entitled to benefit. But again, I wonder, was he a demon? Did they put us in this situation in this hostel and then move us to a particular house? And it added up to number 5, which is in tarot, it's the number of chaos. And I know for a fact that that council house had high technology, frequency, weaponry that triggered my mother into the most insane rages, triggered me into the most insane rages. We were always all falling out. There was usually, most of the time, this air of absolute fucking terror and fear all the time. It was a very small little house, in the lounge. It was so small, you had a window at the front, a window at the back, TV in the corner, little sofa, telephone in the corner. Then on the other side of the staircase, there was a kitchen with a window at the front, a window at the back. And when we first moved in, there was nothing. There was no furniture. There was a kitchen sink, a bath, a toilet, and a bathroom sink, and an electric meter that took 50p pieces, which was the bane of our lives. And that was it. And, I mean, my mother and I, well, my mother especially, she was so excited because there was a little garden at the front and a garden at the back, and there was a hedge. And all that my mother always wanted was just her own place so she could relax and be in her own space after her. I mean, she would have been 40 when we moved there. And she had a breakdown pretty much soon after, once she'd sort of got beds and a cooker and a fridge and basic carpet and a sofa. I mean, we ended up, we had to go to the charity places, whatever. There were special places that you could go. The government gave us or the council, Blackpool Council, gave us £100 grant to buy all the furniture. And once that was kind of organized, and oh my God, it was freezing cold because the heating in the house was like a coal fire. In the lounge with a chimney that went up on the bedroom at the side of my sister and I's bedroom. So the 2 bedrooms next to each other upstairs, and then my mum's bedroom and a bathroom on the other side. The stairs went up the front door to the window at the top, at the back. So it was a very, very small house. And but we had no one looking in on us, which was the thing that my mother was just so desperate for. She was so private. She just wanted her own space, and she never really fit in. People didn't like her, and people felt threatened, and she was probably as unusual as I was and my sister wandering around this Blackpool place. And so yeah, so where am I up to? School. So a lot of things happened at the same time. So we'd moved into the council house. My mother kind of decorated it as best she could, and then had a breakdown. And I spent 1 year in a primary school next to St. Mary's, Christ the King, where I met Mr. Wilson, who taught me. He said, you have received no education, and he couldn't understand how I had reached age 10, 9 to 10. And I mean, I could read, But I don't know, it was just all a bit strange. And so he used to keep me in at breaks and lunch times, which I didn't mind because Maggie McGlynn, who I just was talking about before, and completely went off track. This is why it's good to write, because when you read back, you can fill in the bits you've missed. Maggie McGlynn, the one I said who I suspected had been abused, um, she used to just grab me every playtime and sit on top of me. She'd tax my food, a bag of crisps or whatever it was I had, and she'd just sit on me and not let me go anywhere. And so it used to kind of do my head in a little bit. And so when Mr. Wilson said, okay, I'm going to keep you in, you know, a couple of break times and lunch times, I was not actually too bothered because I was sick of being sat on by Maggie McGlynn. Um, but anyway, fast forward, I get to school and of high school, and you know, there's so much embarrassment, so much humiliation. Everybody's making fun of me. Oh, you live in a council house, your mum's on the dole, you've got no dad, you know, that kind of shit. I mean, you know, the kids really were horrible. But I also know that all the schools are wired with this technology, this frequency disruptor that makes the kids mean. And then they do these freaking movies like Mean Girls, which my older daughter watched. And I think, you know, certain year groups and grades get affected by certain things. I mean, you know what? I can't wait to see how it all worked. Or do I even care? Do I really want to go and find out what they did? Or do we want to focus our time on creating an amazing future where we're free from all this absolute sorcery and shenanigans and bullshit? So I was at school and I just remember, you know, I used to come home most days crying. And my mother used to say, she used to get upset and she used to feel for me. And some days she'd be able to hold space, but some days she couldn't because she was going through her own stuff and we were all being attacked in different ways. Thank God, my sister, who had literally screamed for a year and a half to 2 years every night when this thing was coming, well, up until I think it had fully entered her. And then she stopped screaming because it was already, you know, affecting her. Um, and she stopped, she didn't scream. I think the first night we moved into Grange Park, she was a bit unsettled, but I can't tell you how awful it was. You know, it was just so traumatic, all of it. I was a constant nervous wreck, constantly. But the thing is, after my mother's breakdown, you know, she had many breakdowns and it just got to this into this thing where she would spend most of her time in bed. And so often I'd be having to go and get food and, you know, come home and try and cook it. And I never did it right. You know, mashed potatoes were always cold by the time she got them and she wouldn't be happy. And I understand what was going on. I understand the the mind control that was happening and the frequencies and that how she was feeling and how she was kind of putting those feelings onto the things around her to try and make sense of it. It's really hard to explain, but I am going to keep trying to talk about it and to the point where people can really understand what I'm saying. But what happens is they do this frequency thing. Prince talked about it in an interview once where he said, you know, he'd be in the ghetto, you'd get a nice bright morning and everybody would be playing the music and running around, the kids would be playing, the parents would be talking to each other, helping each other, you know, chatting, having a cup of coffee together over the fence or whatever. And then he said that I can't remember exactly what, but it would be either something like the planes would start flying or the sun would go or the weather would change or something would happen. And literally in an instant, everybody would start falling out and arguing and getting upset. And then there'd be gunshots going. And this is what they've done. The human being in the natural, original, divine blueprint state is a being of love and grace and beauty and kindness. And it's so within us to, it's so our natural state to connect and help. And because that's where the joy comes from, you know, for me, service to others and helping others find the joy or helping others to see the beauty in themselves. There's nothing more wonderful. It just makes me feel so happy. And I guess that's why, in a way, I always felt responsible for my mum, in terms of just trying to bring her up and keep her vibe up and just keep her alive. And but it was hard because her moods were so awful and aggressive and violent. And while she never was really that physical, it was kind of like mental torture. But I realize now, because I went through the same thing with my children, not to quite the same extent, but it came close. And, only I think because I had my husband with me, and even though we were struggling a bit, and I suspect, there's issues with that family generationally, they're Persian, and we know the Persians have been attacked because they were the original part of the original white hats, right? Because this has been going on for so long. Um, yeah, I never fully was able to get out of control too much because I was kind of being watched. But I do wonder, if I'd been in my mother's situation, because this generational curse, they've been attacking us purposefully generation by generation, so that by this generation of the young ones who are now, you know, following Lucifer, um, it would be very easy for them to just be flipped. And so it was this gradual kind of process. And yeah, I do. I mean, I remember once being in such a state, and my Imogen, my children's father, was traveling, as he often did. He traveled a lot. And I remember getting into a bit of a, not a disagreement. I was a bit stressed about something. I was trying to get the kids to go to bed, and they were quite small. And I don't know if I was arguing with not arguing, but if I'd got into a bit of a discussion with one of them who couldn't sleep. I mean, my older one, in fact, both of them struggled, when they were younger, with school. And again, the frequencies, they were coming home and talking about stuff and they were depressed. They were suffering with anxiety, and they just didn't like school. And they both went through, as I'm sure many of you who've got children have experienced this, they went through phases, pretty in the first couple of years, right, of going off to school. They went through phases of not wanting to go there at all, of crying and begging. And I don't want to go into it because it will make me start crying again, because I forgive myself, but I can't believe that I actually sent them to school when they were crying and begging me not to go. And we've all been there, like, but you have to go. And I just remember having these discussions with them and just feeling this really uncomfortable feeling, because it was up to me. I would have homeschooled them, but unfortunately in Asia, especially amongst the Indian and Chinese communities, it's all about becoming a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant. And you've got to be the best, and you've got to be ahead, and you have to go to school. The programming was everywhere. And so it was very difficult for me to kind of do what I wanted with my children. But anyway, I'm kind of jumping all over. That's the Malaysia part, a bit of the Malaysia story. And, the whole of the family in Malaysia was being attacked by this shit as well. But yeah, so school was pretty difficult. I was being bullied. I was kind of smart. So I was always in the top classes, but because I lived in the council estate, the kind of like, keynote kids didn't want me around. And then because I was in the keynote kids classes, the council estate kids didn't want me around. So I was completely, had no real friends. The only friend, well, I had one friend, Gemma Kennedy, who lived on the same council estate, and thank God for her. And before her was a girl called Dawn Cowley, who, she was like the fit girl in the school, and she had short hair, and she was pretty stocky. I mean, almost could have been a boy. And we don't know what goes on. Her dad was a policeman or a builder. I can't remember. She went into the police force though. And she bullied me and was always getting me to stay over at her house. And she had a Commodore 64 computer, which she would play and never let me have a go. And I was so desperate. I was like into all that technology stuff. And yeah, like I said, I came home most days crying, and some days my mother was able to help me. I remember her once telling me that, look, Kerry, I know that I'm not much, but I am a little pebble. And how true, because if she had let go and, anything had happened, yeah, we would have been in care. Um, Two things as well about this whole thing about care in Grange Park. I found out actually from my oldest daughter not too long ago, actually within the lockdown. This is so bizarre. And she said to me one day, Mom, did you know that there was a home for dangerous boys near the council estate where you grew up? And I was like, oh my God, no way. Because so basically council estates are usually on the edges of towns. And they always like quite often have a kind of what's called a boundary line, um, which is green fields, a patch of green that demarks the next town or something. So Blackpool has this boundary of green, and then you get into Poulton Le Fylde, which is a little village after it's now a small town. And this home for dangerous boys was located in these what we used to call the back fields, right? So they were called the back fields because they were at the back of the council estate. And we'd often go there, because we always wanted to be pretending we were riding horses and in our Victorian princess dresses, and we wanted to go exploring in the greenery, right? But there would always be men without dogs, just like wandering around, and with you just got a vibe, that this isn't something's just not right. And there were stories, oh yeah, the backfields are dangerous and there's dirty old men. And probably because the stories were coming from the dirty old men who lived in the council estate, who were going to the home for dangerous boys to torture them and kill them. And the thing is, when I'd moved in, probably just before puberty or around that time, I started to have these kind of weird, um, it's so hard to explain. These weird kind of, they weren't dreams because I was awake, and it was almost like, when you're trying to sleep and you're trying to calm your mind down, and you've got all sorts going around in your head. Well, what would be going around in my head would be that I was somehow in some kind of dungeon underground, and there'd be a boy. It was always boys. I never saw girls. And the boy would be either tied to a chair in the middle of a cell, a dark stone cell, like a prison cell. And they'd be tied to a chair, or they'd be hanging from the ceiling with chains. So they'd be just, their feet would be on the floor, but they would have their arms up chained. And I'm not going to go into detail, but it was as if I was the perpetrator, and I was watching through the eyes of the perpetrator as they tortured the child in the room, who usually was under the age of about 10. There were a couple of older boys, and this was happening most nights, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And it would go on for a long time, and I would literally be witnessing the most horrific things you can imagine. And I thought this was me, this was my imagination, and that I was creating this in my head. And so therefore I was fucked up. Something was really wrong with me. And yeah, it was just awful. And I kind of guess when the frequency was not being emitted, or when I was not being remotely controlled or MK Ultra activated into viewing this in order to create trauma for me, it was as if it hadn't happened. I was completely fine, because it was only every time when I went to bed and it started that I'd be like, oh no, not this again. And it was a similar thing to my sister's nightmares and screaming. Um, it was just all so wrong. It was all so fucked up and weird. And it was like I had this constant feeling of like, this isn't supposed to be happening. What the fuck is happening? There's something more. And it was like, but how could you ever know, right? That you were being manipulated and that you were being assaulted with very highly advanced technology. And the purpose of it was to get you to commit suicide or to commit crimes like that yourself. That was the whole purpose. And, there were a couple of times where my mother, obviously, she was in that house all the time. She didn't escape. And so, we'd come home from school and she'd be, oh, hello, darlings, how are you? Come in. And we'd be, making, oh, thank God she's in a good mood and making dinner. And the next thing, if you did one wrong thing, it was like she was a completely different person. She even looked different and the voice changed. And it would become this very guttural Irish, what did you just do? What did you do, you little pup? And, it was terrifying. And again, we never answered her back. We never argued. We never told her to F off in my whole life, apart from when I was a bit older. And I never ever have said that. I might have cried and railed a bit about certain things that happened, but she remembers none of it. And I used to think she was lying, but I now know she was an altered character, an altered state that was coming in. She was literally what they would call schizophrenic. And so, and she would be aware, like I was when I was, things were happening with my children, like I think I was just about to say earlier. There was at one time where my mother bit my sister's nose in one of our there was, we were always in these fights, especially from the teenage years. It was just awful. And I remember my sister weirdly just used to cause a lot of problems. And, my mother used to always kind of deify me. I don't know, is it because I was the firstborn or I was just easier? We were both Libras. My sister was a Taurus. I don't know. There was just some kind of stuff going on, or was it because I looked like my father? I suspect it was just the firstborn thing, and also because we had signed a contract together to do this, to experience this reality in that way. But there were a couple of times that my mother gathered us into her bedroom and attempted to get my sister and I to take a whole bunch of pills that she'd saved up because she wanted us to all commit suicide because she could not handle her life. She was in so much emotional, psychic, and spiritual pain that she wanted us all to just die. But my sister and I, of course, had this inbuilt, like, no, what the fuck, and she was never going to leave us alone. She tried once to leave us and told us people would come and pick us up or come and get us. And she went off with the intention of throwing herself off the pier, but she couldn't do it. But this was how much pain. And again, this is the mind control, in these places. This is what they do, the frequency manipulation and the voice to skull and all that shit, which has been going on, in these groups of people all around the planet for a very, 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 very long time. And, we are the unseen and the unheard voices who are now going to be seen and heard. So, yeah, that was all quite traumatic. And I think I was on a thread which I've lost. Yeah, so the moods would continue. And, I couldn't wait to get off to university. I was out of there. And again, I always felt like I was running away from my mother or I was trying to escape my mother, but it wasn't. I was escaping the house and the frequencies and all the bullshit of Grange Park and how I felt and everything. And I was at sixth form, I became kind of cool and I had a boyfriend and hung out with some people and smoked marijuana and started drinking. And Blackpool was pretty crazy, the clubs and everything. Started to become promiscuous, not because I was just a slag, but because I was in such desperate need of acceptance and love on a deep level. And also, when you are sexually molested as an infant, you get very confused about love and sex. For you, you can meet someone the first time, and if they show you an inkling of kindness or anything, you know, your hormones are going and all the endocrine system is fired up, and you are um, just so open to giving yourself away because you think that's what love is. You think that love is sex, or love is letting people touch you or do what they want, and you never say no, even if it gets uncomfortable, or even if you know that you're being abused. You can't. There's a kind of a paralysis that happens, a shutdown, and this is all the mind control, the MK Ultra that they do when you're a child, and like being locked in a coffin, whether it was underground or not, it doesn't matter. I was in a coffin and, you know, maggots and whatever being fed in. And you are then, once you're fragmented, it's easy to control. And of course, they want you to be open your legs everywhere you go, because each time you're having a sexual encounter, you're taking on that energy. And I now realize I had a lot of CIA operatives who were posing as these kind of slightly older guys, especially when I was kind of 17, 16, 17, 18, before I went off to university. And they would meet me in the clubs in Blackpool and tell me how amazing and gorgeous and fabulous I was. And they'd take me on a date and we'd go for dinner and stuff. And they'd have a car or an apartment. And I actually realize now these were just activated soldiers, right, for the dark side. And then nothing. They'd disappear. And it was my dad disappearing over and over again. And the pain and the insanity and the level of, I mean, I actually don't have words to describe the feeling that you get in your solar plexus and your heart when this technology is being activated. It's all about getting you to commit suicide, and because they can't touch us, because we're divine and we came here for a reason, and that reason is now, and it's happening. So yeah, I was a bit of a mess all over the place, went off to university, and uni was kind of okay. You know, I had some interesting friends. Again, I was still a misfit. I didn't really fit in. I was all over the place, constantly drinking and smoking. Scraped a 2-2 in English and philosophy with Greek and Roman studies. Isn't it interesting what I chose to study and where we are now? And you know, probably should pause, right? I know this is such a lot of information, and it is, and I'm still at the beginning, you know, got everything that happened when I was a teacher and everything that happened in Malaysia. I'm trying to get through this as quickly as I can. Um, so yeah, also at university, of course, I mentioned at the beginning was my father, who I got in touch with, and he completely rejected me. He was furious. He told me I was never to contact him again, and if I did, he would have me locked up quicker than I could, whatever it was he decided to frighten me with. So I remember just sinking to the ground in the hall of residence hallway where the phone was. I had a girl with me who had befriended me. Her dad worked for like some secret government, like MI something, you know. He had a cool car. He took us to, him and her parents took us to Scotland for snow one Christmas. It was crazy. The whole drive up there, he was telling us all sorts of really bizarre stuff and warning us about the terrible things that go on in the world that he didn't want to tell us about, but that there was this whole, I mean, he knew. I kind of feel like his daughter, Louise, she was kind of a little bit clone-like. I mean, you know, she used to wet the bed, and I'm sorry, I probably really shouldn't share other people's information. I won't say her name. Um, she kind of was a bit of a godsend. She first came up to me at the University Union Bar where I was working, and she's like, "You're a Libra." She was a Scouser. Are you a Libra? It's like, oh my God, how did you know? Well, she wouldn't know if she had a file on me and she'd been sent to somehow I mean, I don't know. It was just bizarre. Everything that happened to me, all the people that came into my life and then disappeared and who were never really friends, but they acted like friends. It was just so strange. But it was her father who tracked, she helped me track down my dad and get his number for me to contact him. And then the trauma of the rejection, which is why I still, even though to this day, right now, I've got 4 pence in my account. Actually, no, I've not. My daughter sent me some money. So I've now got £50, which isn't going to, it'll get me 2 beers and a bottle of water. Yeah. And so I have not much at the moment, but I do have a car. I have a roof over my head for 6 months, but I can't ask people for help. I have such trauma of rejection, although I'm working on that at the moment. And I did a session yesterday with Gordon Smith Duran, who has the Peaceful Rebellion channel. And, I was like, yeah, I can't be hypnotized. And he's like, well, hypnosis isn't quite what you think. And I think you'll find that you can. But it kind of turned out I couldn't easily. But it just means that we have to, work a bit slower. But even just whatever happened yesterday, and I am going to share that because I'm going to share the sessions that we do so that people can gain something from it. Because obviously, the stuff that's going to come out about all the children, and there's going to be loads of kids that need help and looking after. And I think the reason I'm sharing this information is, oh, forgive me. I think I'm going to move on to part two. Um, it's so that we can help and understand and not be afraid when people are freaking out and acting really weird because they're in so much pain. It's just been humiliating, the whole process. And, I really want to talk about what happened in the past 4 years as well, and how much we were gaslit and attacked by so-called truthers and Mark Atwood. I'm going to be talking about you. So I'll be very kind though, because I believe that you have been MK Ultra'd and that you've been activated for the dark side right now, and you're looking like you're for the light, but you're not. And whether you're doing it on purpose or you're being literally puppeted, I don't know. But it's all not okay. And I don't know. I didn't want to mention him right now, but what happened with him was demonic. He really tried to destroy me, but it didn't work. And it's all going to come out. So I'm actually going to take a break and I'll come back with part two. I'm sure you're also a little bit overwhelmed. I will come back and talk about what happened to me when I was teaching, because that's where it really starts to get into the government being involved in people like me and the targeting. I am without question a massively targeted individual, like many. And that's another reason that I'm sharing my story, is because I just want people, because I'm not alone. It's not just me. And the majority are either in denial or they just haven't got a clue. They can't remember. So yeah, I'll come back and I'll talk about what happened to me when I was teaching and how that was the catalyst for me going to Malaysia, and what happened to me there with the black magic. And then of course and with the royal family, a couple of the members of the royal family who apparently, I don't know. I don't really know why they chose me to be initiated into this kind of anti-government, anti-black magic group. I mean, I really don't know, but it doesn't matter, because everything that's happened to me has been a lesson, and I wouldn't change anything. I'm not saying I would necessarily run off to the next planet and do the same again, or want to come back and experience this again, but I really wouldn't take any of it back because everything has been a jigsaw piece that's allowed me to be awake during the past 4 years. And I do believe that now is the time everything's going to be disclosed and it's going to get chaotic. And so I'm just wanting to get as much of this stuff out now before it just becomes about the kids and the healing, and it won't be about me at all anymore. It will be about the service to others, and that's all I'm here for. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna go have a bit of a breathe and a rest, and I'll be back. And I really hope that this is useful. I really hope I'm not, coming off as being a victim or me. But at the same time, there's a little voice saying, Kerry, it's about you now, and be glorious in the sharing of your story, and no shame, no shame. As humiliating as it's been, no shame, and total love and forgiveness for all involved, because everybody's a victim. Everybody's been a victim of what's happened on the planet, and but then again, duality, and we chose. So are we victims, or are we about to find out that, we've all just taken part in a story, a narrative our soul needed in order to be transfigured, transmuted, and healed, for the next breath of God. And we are on the in breath, and we are being drawn home, and I can feel it. And it's amazing, and it's glorious, and I'll be back.